Hello and welcome to this premium episode number 388. I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Premium means that this interview is reserved for you, our premium subscribers. Thank you very much for joining us today and for supporting the podcast with your paid subscription. And don't forget that you'll get PDUs just for listening. Please visit pm-podcast.com/PDU for the details and then tell all your friends about the free PDUs you're getting. In this second interview with Jamal Mustafaev, we take what we learned about the project portfolio management process and discuss how to implement it in our organizations. We look at PPM reviews, internal resource costs, the importance of our mission and strategy, how involved C-level executives need to be, a charter for portfolio management, how the halo effect can skew your project selection methods, and how to improve the quality of project proposals. All of these ideas are, of course, taken from his book, Project Portfolio Management in Theory and Practice, 30 case studies from around the world, with the intent of giving you practical tips on how to implement project portfolio management in your own organization. And so, let's get practical. Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview.
Today with Jamal Mustafaev, President and CEO of Think Tank Consulting, a consulting company specializing in project and portfolio management services.
Hello, Jamal. Welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Hi, Cornelius. Always great to be back.
Okay, so we want to talk about implementing project portfolio management and then how we link it to the strategy. But first, please remind us, what is project portfolio management?
Well, my favorite definition of project portfolio management, and probably the reason I like it so much is because I was the one who created it. Project portfolio management is the science and the art of selecting the best projects for the organization and maintenance of the project pipeline subject to internal and external constraints. I always make the stresses on selecting the best projects.
All right. And in order for us to get started with the discussion on implementing PPM and linking it to strategy, you suggested that we start talking first about PPM reviews. What are PPM reviews?
Well, you have to have, before you even go into the PPM reviews, you have to have your scoring model developed.
Mm-hmm. We talked about those in the last interview. Excellent, yeah.
Yep. And I still believe you will share some of the examples that I sent you on this page as well, so the listeners can go and examine them. You have to have your strategic alignment model developed, and you have to have your portfolio balance model developed. Once you have them in hand, then the infographics that I believe you will share with the readers, I always encourage at the end of the workshops with companies where I did project portfolio management implementations, I encourage them to print these models on very large sheets of paper and putting them on the wall of every decision maker in the company. The reason for that being, you might be sitting in the office and suddenly, you have an idea and you say, wouldn't it be really cool if we could do this? Well, the standard operating procedure will require you to write a business case. And in that business case, you would have to put your project through the scoring model that has been developed and approved by the Project Portfolio Management Committee consisting of senior executives. The idea here being is that, if your project gets 3 points out of 100, probably you shouldn't even be bothering the Project Portfolio Management Committee with that project proposal, unless it is mission critical, stay in business kind of thing. You write your business case. You say, as a part of the business case, my project got 67 out of 100, and I believe that's high enough score for it to be considered. This is all phase one. You evaluate project values and benefits. You look at risks. You determine what kind of resources you will need at high level. This is all coming from the person who is proposing that project. And then you go in front of the committee with that business case. You probably put that business case through the PMO, where PMO says, okay, yeah, that information is correct. Yes, you supplied this. Well, no, we will need a bit more information about the resources. And you go in front of the project portfolio management committee and you go, okay, my name is Jamal and I think our company should include this project into our pipeline for the next year. And then they go, okay, Jamal, you said 67 out of 100. That's a fairly high score. Where did you get that? Well, I assume that strategic fit, it fits 3 out of 5 strategies that we have. And then you get engaged into the discussion. Then you look at this is a bit more technical, and I'm not going to get into that in this interview. You look whether this is a good fit with balancing. Then you look at strategic alignment. And if the project makes it through all of these 3 gates, then that projects get added to the project pipeline. This is phase 1 review. This is at the very beginning, before the initiative becomes a project, or before the idea officially becomes a project at your organization. Phase 2 reviews, they happen multiple times. Again, in the previous interview I mentioned, as frequently as monthly or once every quarter, depending on the project size, typical project size for organization. And you keep asking the same questions again. Well, we said it was 67 out of 100. Is it still 67 out of 100, or has some things changed? Is this project on time? Is this project on budget? We said we will need 10 resources for this project. Is that still the case? Do we see any risks kind of rearing their heads that will affect the value of this project as an organization? Have there been any external changes? And this is the borderline, the science and the art. Like, as long as you're in how many points out of 100, you're in science. But when you have to assess external changes, for example, you're getting into art. So again, phase 1 review. Is this project go or no go? Phase 2 reviews, multiple. They happen at regular intervals to see whether we're still on track. The project hasn't become the runaway train, so to speak.
Right, and just to be absolutely clear, phase 2 reviews, that's after the project has started.
Yes. You can do it at the end of the initiation, you can do it at the end of planning, you can do it at the end of execution, or you can do it on a monthly basis.
Mm-hmm. Who's responsible for these reviews, phase 1 and phase 2?
Responsible for organizing them, someone whose title is Project Portfolio Manager, Project Portfolio Director, PMO Manager, PMO Director, VP of Projects. Title vary from company to company. He's responsible for gathering all that information and present. But the people who are responsible for making the decision is the Project Portfolio Management Committee, which consists of all the C-level people at the company.
Okay. For my next question, we have to get back to your book. And just as a reminder, the book is called Project Portfolio Management in Theory and Practice, 30 case studies from around the world with best practices and advances in program management. And in the book, you mention internal resource costs. What do you mean?
Well, here's the thing that happens at many companies. When you sit and talk to their C-level people and you go, are your internal resources free? They go, no. They're not free. We pay them salary and we benefits and rent for the office and equipment. And go, okay, do you consider the internal costs when you assess the projects? And they go, what do you mean? Well, 10 years ago, and I'm sure that number has increased, but it was a significant number even at the time. Organization I was working for calculated that the blended rate for their employees is about $10,000 per man month or person month. So the cost of keeping Jamal, average cost of keeping Jamal on the job at the organization was about $10,000. Salary plus benefit plus taxes plus rent plus infrastructure costs, etc. Is $10,000 a large amount of money? What happens if you have 200 man month or person month allocated to a project? Do you know what 200 man month translates into? 1.8 million if you go with $9,000 per man month. Those figures can severely affect the financial assessment of the project. For example, project A that has very little external costs, consulting or hardware, software, and a lot of internal costs. Compare that to the project B that has some external costs but a lot of internal ones. Which project do you think will be favored? If you don't, and usually they don't count that, they favor the projects with very little internal costs. Very little external costs. We have to buy, server for $200,000, and ignoring to assess the internal resource costs can lead to a significant changes or improper changes to how the projects are assessed.
Mm-hmm.
That's why one of the things, the very first thing that I do in my project portfolio management implementation, I say, okay, let me sit down with your CFO or senior accountant. I mean, we don't need an exact number, but let's calculate a blended rate for your employees. I mean, it can be just one rate. I mean, starting from the janitor all the way to the CEO. What is the cost of average person month at your company? And then when you come in with a project proposal, if your project has very little external costs, but it requires 1,000 person month of work of your internal people, you better incorporate that into the financial assessment of the project.
Yeah.
You can. I will share the link with you. You can. I compare a couple of projects side by side, and what happens when you do consider internal resources, and what happens when you don't consider them. I will send you with a link. It's called...
Absolutely, and we'll include it in the show notes, yep.
I have an article called, Do You Consider Companies' Internal Resource Costs When Prioritizing Projects?
Mm. You know, it's very interesting because the PMBOK Guide 6th edition is currently, pre-release is out later this year. It will be released. My company, we are a PMP training company. So, we have to upgrade all our training products to PMBOK 6. And we are currently going through exactly those kinds of discussions. How are we going to track our projects? What exactly do we want to calculate? How do we measure in the end how much it actually costs us to do all of these updates and just to figure out, is this worth our time in the future? When PMBOK 7 comes out, do we really want to continue? And do we want to keep doing that? So it's very interesting because I'm exactly in that mindset of how do we get the internal resource cost properly assigned to the projects, and leading me right into the next question that I had for you, and that has to do with the company mission and strategy. What role, because we've just gone through a complete revamp of our company strategy, our mission, and our core values, we completely redefined that. What role does that play in PPM, project portfolio management implementation?
As I mentioned in my previous interview, if you don't have strategy, you will not have PPM. Because PPM, project portfolio management, it has 3 pillars: project value, portfolio balance, and portfolio strategic alignment or project strategic alignment. And each one of them has a direct relationship with company strategy. And again, strategy that is clear and simple. For example, strategy that says we will be innovative and creative leaders in the world of technology doesn't work because it's very difficult to align project proposals with that strategy communicated in that way. If your strategy says something to the effect of we want to increase our market share by 10% in markets A and B, that's very measurable. Having said that, about 90 to 95% of companies I worked with, and that is supported by other studies as well, more academic studies, they have strategic alignment or strategic fit as one of the variables in their scoring models. And again, I invite your listeners to go and check out some of the samples that I sent you, the infographics that I've created based on my interactions with my clients. So it is very difficult to discover a scoring model that does not have a strategic fit variable in it. And very frequently, that's a kill category. And I'll explain what that means. If I propose a project that scores 10 out of 10 in all other variables, but receives 0 in the strategic fit, that project is killed. That's how extreme that approach is. Balance, again, strategy, another facet of strategy. How risk tolerant are you? Are you risk averse or are you a risk taker? Compare on one hand bank or an insurance company versus software company that makes apps, gaming apps, for example. Well, banks naturally and insurance companies will be risk averse. Hence, that would directly impact their portfolio of projects. They will say, you know what, we want 90% of our portfolio to be low risk, low reward zone. Whereas aggressive, smaller software product companies, for example, they will say, no, we want the bulk of our portfolio to be in the R&D, and R&D means high risk, high reward. Strategic alignment, very powerful tool. You basically go in front of the executives and you say, what percentage of your projects do you think should be in aggressive bucket? Aggressive bucket meaning development of new product families or development of new products. What percentage of your projects do you want to be in the average risk, average reward, meaning improvements to the existing products? And what percentage of your projects do you want to be in maintenance, stay in business kind of things?
In our first interview, you already talked about this. We were talking about, this small company who wanted to take on Microsoft, right, with only 5% of their projects being assigned to R&D. What other problems do you see in this regard that companies have?
Well, the companies that I see that don't get project portfolio, don't understand project portfolio management, is that they make very bold statements regarding where they're going and what they're planning to do. But when you start examining, kind of reverse engineering their portfolio management, they can say, okay, what are the top 20 projects that you're doing? What kind of project is that? And you suddenly discover that 19 out of 20 projects they're doing have to do with mundane improvements to current products they have that are not really in demand in the market, and only one project, under-resourced and understaffed, is working on something that market really needs, like what's going to be on the market tomorrow. You kind of question their commitment to being the innovative and creative leader on the market. I can give you a very long list on the opposite side, where companies that are very risk-averse and conservative by nature invested 95% of their project portfolio into something high-risk and high reward, or in extreme cases, high risk and low reward. Mm-hmm. Meaning they're going to lose money on that. They're just not entirely sure how much money they're going to lose. It's a large amount of money or a smaller amount of money.
All right. If something like this happens, you in your book and in our previous discussion, you stress the importance of the executive involvement in project portfolio deployment. If something like this happens, a complete misalignment from strategy to what you have, like you're, risk averse, that all your projects are high risk, it means that there is a disconnect between the people who made the decisions, yes, we're doing these projects, versus their understanding of what they're really doing here. In the first interview, you said, nowadays project management is understood. We do know we need it, at least in North America, Europe as well. I can attest to that. So we have these two areas. Outside of that, I don't consider myself a specialist on it. But
well, I go there all the time. Yeah. You still have to sell. You have to convince people.
Really? Okay.
I recently got a call. Literally today in the morning, I got a call from Eastern Europe, a very large company over there that said, okay, listen, I know that we need project management, but I want you to get on the plane, fly for 24 hours, with all the transfers and stuff like that, and basically do a 2-hour presentation to all of our executives. And please try to convince them that project management is a good investment. And then you get on the plane and fly 24 hours back. So, yes.
Okay. So, but, you mentioned the big situation that you're seeing, North America at least, portfolio management isn't understood. And my assumption is if we have this disconnect between, risk-averse company, but all the projects almost are high risk, there is a disconnect from the decision makers. How do we get the decision makers to get it? What has to happen?
Well, if we look at what happened with project management, when I started my career 20 years ago, it was 20 years ago, education. You have to have education. Like when I went through my BBA and MBA degrees at university here in Canada, Simon Fraser University, which is one of the best universities, considered to be one of the best universities in Canada, there were no project management courses there. Like even if you wanted to take one, and I actually concentrated in finance and management science, there was no project management course there. Nowadays, if you're in business, computer science, engineering, and a whole bunch of other fields, project management course is mandatory. This is how far along we got in the last 20 years. So you have people, even junior professionals, joining the industry, understanding that project management is a must. I expect the same thing to happen with project portfolio management. It will be a mix of education, efforts by PMI. Interestingly enough, and I kind of always say that tongue-in-cheek, The big software companies, especially Microsoft, Computer Associates, I believe Hewlett and Packard, and there's another one, Oracle, I think. They're the big players in the project portfolio management field by pushing their software, and they're doing their stuff, educating people, executives, that PPM is a good thing. However, unfortunately, what they also do, they put across a message saying, here's a DVD, install it in your server, download it on your computer, and all of your project portfolio management issues will go away.
Yeah, we now know that there is more to it than just installing the software. Like you said earlier on, I believe it was in the first interview, don't install the software. Do it without the software first, and once you know how it actually works, then, it's time to move over to a software. You mentioned education. In many cases, we now understand that the C-level executives, those are the decision makers. They are part of, deciding which projects go through. So education isn't required for the project managers in regards to portfolio management, but almost every MBA course has to have a mandatory project portfolio management training included.
Actually, there is a somewhat of a positive trend that, at least in Vancouver, I got invited 2 or 3 times over the course of the last several years. Executive and non-executive MBA programs where they're running project management is now a mandatory course in their curriculum. And because these instructors, they recognize me as one of the project portfolio management experts, they invited me to at least give them a taste, like a 1 or 2 hour presentation to tell the students about project portfolio management. So yeah, it's a first step in a very long journey. I believe in about 5 or 10 years we will be there. I'm doing my part by publishing, through my blog, thinktankconsulting.ca, project portfolio management, case studies and topics, but we will be there.
Let's move on. In your book, you also mentioned 3 very interesting theories in an attempt to explain the optimism bias. Tell me more about them.
Oh, one of my favorite topics. Well, optimism bias basically says that we as human beings tend to constantly underestimate the complexities of the tasks in front of us and overestimate our abilities to complete those tasks. One of my, if you let me just go off on a tangent 5 minutes, one of my favorite examples of optimism bias, and then I'll explain the theories, is I remember when was that? 4 years ago, my son was supposed to go to daycare for the first time. And on one of the first days, my wife called me and said, okay, we will be at the SkyTrain, or metro station. SkyTrain that's what we call it in Vancouver. In 20 minutes. Please be there. Me being as a project manager, I left 10 minutes earlier. I drove to the SkyTrain station, the metro station. 20 minutes, they're not there. 25 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes later, they show up. And I go, what happened? Something happened along the way? She goes, no. I go, why did you say 20 minutes? She goes, well, I looked on the SkyTrain website and it told me that from station A to station B, it will take 20 minutes. I'll go, okay, did you consider the time that you have to walk from your office to the daycare? Locate our child in a pile of screaming kids. Take him out of that pile. Dress him up. Walk to the SkyTrain station. Wait for the train to arrive. And then get on the train. So this is, a perfect example of us underestimating the complexity of the task and overestimating our abilities to fulfill them. There's 3 explanations if we get more serious. There's 3 explanations, 3 theories. The weakest one, in my opinion, is the standard economic theory that says, hey, this is life. You lose some, you win some. Some of the projects we finish on time and on budget, and some projects we finish late. As I said, the weakest one. There's the mass delusion explanation put forward by scientists Dan Lovallo and Daniel Kahneman, who is, by the way, a winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. It says exactly what I said earlier. We think that people tend to overestimate the benefits and underestimate the cost of the future projects. If you translate that, take it from the project management perspective to the project portfolio management. And hence, companies must employ external experts to generate accurate and unbiased estimates for their projects. Again, they say it's just human nature. Homo sapiens is wired in such a way that we overestimate the benefits of any given project and we underestimate the costs. The third explanation put forward by Ben Flubberg, who is dedicated his entire life. He's also, from the science world, he's dedicated his entire life to studying mega projects, and I believe he's a professor at Oxford University. He calls it the Machiavelli factor explanation. He thinks that the reason we have quote-unquote optimism bias is deliberate cooking of the books, because executives were rewarded with heavy incentives for rosy forecasts and faced very minor penalties when their predictions proved to be wrong. And they also point out that the relative size of the estimation errors remains suspiciously constant. They also say humans are, as a rule, very capable of learning from their mistakes, and yet in the course of the last 70 to 100 years, we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So it is highly unlikely that it is some wrong wiring in our brains. It is the deliberate cooking of the books.
And how do we relate these three theories to portfolio management?
You can't really relate the first one. If you choose to believe mass delusion explanation, then you have to hire external people, consultants who will assess. And I know many government organizations, some government organizations, I should say, do that. The Machiavelli factor with, the deliberate cooking of the books, I'm going to go and lie to people and convince them that this project will have an ROI of 200%, when I know fully well it's not going to do that. You have to have one of the tools that project portfolio management is these project portfolio management committees, the discussion with all the key C-level people in the room present. Hopefully that will prevent people from, presenting false ideas when you have critical assessment of the proposal. Like, if we take any North American company, if I go right now, let's say I'm a VP of marketing, and I go, let's create this product, and I think it will have a return on investment of 200%. It is very likely, and I hope you will agree with me, that most of the people in the room will roll their eyes and say, wait a second, 200% return on investment? That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, if it sounds too good, it probably is.
So they will probably challenge me and say, wait a second. What's the cost of the project? Have you considered this? And then the technical people in the room say, what do you mean the project will cost $50,000? Our competitor did the same thing and cost them $500,000. And then someone in sales will say, well, our competitors came up with a similar product and they were able to sell only $1 million worth of that product. How can you predict 10? Right? And it will very quickly lead me to some reasonable ROI. So having these discussions is very important.
All right. Every project needs a charter. And in your book, you also talk about a project portfolio management charter. Tell us more about that.
Well, charter is just a word I came up with. It can be called Project Portfolio Management Standard Operating Procedure. It's basically a project portfolio management manual. Some companies like the word charter, some companies like standard operating procedure. Basically, it's a document that contains the following things. It clarifies the roles, the responsibilities, and the expectations of all the project stakeholders. It says who is going to be on the executive committee. Remember the Project Portfolio Management Executive Committee? What is the role of departmental managers? What is the role of PMO, PPMO manager? What are project managers responsible for? It describes all of the project management and project portfolio management related organizational processes. How do we score business cases? How do we approve them? What happens at the project initiation? What happens during planning, execution, etc. Communication procedures. How portfolio committee will talk to the department heads. How project managers will talk with the portfolio committee. How portfolio committee will talk with the company employees. It definitely has to include a scoring model, a balance model, and the strategic fit. Again, I encourage your listeners to go take a look at the sample ones that I send your way and you hopefully will publish on your page. Mm-hmm. What are the portfolio cycles? What are the checkpoints, the phases? What questions should be asked? What are the project management performance metrics? What are the project portfolio management key performance metrics? Stuff like that. It can be as small as big, but the stuff that I mentioned here is definitely something that should be in the table of contents.
All of our listeners who have prepared for their PMP exam, at some point they will have learned during the training about the halo effect, which is the tendency for an impression created in one area to influence an opinion in another area. Now, how does the halo effect come into the context of project portfolio management?
Actually, yeah, it's on one hand it's a very technical term. On the other hand, technical phenomenon. On the other hand, remember in my definition, I said it's a science and the art. This is a perfect example of art in project portfolio management. Depending on the makeup of your audience, they will tend to select the variables that are close and dear to them. For example, if you have a room where you have a lot of people with marketing and sales background, and it just can happen, they will select variables that somehow reflect marketing and or sales domains. On the other hand, if you have, for example, lots of people with financial background in the room, guess what? They're going to gravitate towards financial variables from the financial domain. I'll give you one example. Imagine that as a result of your exercise, and there is a specific exercise that I describe in the book how to do that. You develop a model that has the following variables: strategic fit, return on investment, market attractiveness, net present value, payback, and technical feasibility. First look says, well, okay, it's fine. But if you examine it further, you will discover that return on investment, net present value, and payback are very highly correlated. The higher the return on investment, the more likely that net present value will be high. The more likely that the payback will be shorter. So these three are very strongly correlated. One can make an argument that market attractiveness is also highly correlated with all the financial measures. Why? Because the more attractive the product is for the market, the higher the return on investment will be. So it would take an experienced portfolio management expert to look at that model and say, guys, this is great, but you're going to have a halo effect here because you have 1, 2, 3 variables that are very highly correlated and one that is somewhat correlated. So he would probably propose, and this is not the science, this is the art. Let's go with strategic fit, financial performance, and it could be some combination of ROI, NPV, and payback, market attractiveness, and technical feasibility. So that would be an example of halo effect in the PPM world.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Let's take a look at how we can improve the proposal quality, the project proposal quality. In our first interview, you mentioned, once you have the model, print the model out, big pieces of paper, hang those up in the decision makers' offices so that when they work on these proposals, that's what they can look at and they can bring the right numbers directly to you. What other ways do we have to increase or to improve the proposal quality?
Well, in some cases, I went as extreme as saying, not just the decision makers, put them in the hallways, put them by the elevators, put them in the company cafeteria. Sometimes you hear from people, well, our competitors will see that and go, well, listen, the portfolio management model that you're using will most definitely not benefit your competitors because due to subtle changes, even if you're in the same business and in the same industry, theirs would be different. It's never going to be exactly the same, just because of different strategies and different goals. When you do that, once you do that, allow your employees to participate in the preliminary ranking processes. Reward your workers financially for successful ideas. For example, announce to the company, whoever proposes the highest ranking project or top 3 will get $1,000 from us. You can run contests for best project ideas. A great idea would be to invite your customers, vendors, and suppliers to participate in the process. They can propose, well, why don't you do this? Because very frequently customers, they see the real improvements that they want that would make their life easier, whereas the company does not realize that. Make the proposal submission process as easy and transparent as possible. Contests is a great idea. Demonstrate the positive impact on sales, saying, guys, it has been 3 years that I've been doing project portfolio management. Our sales have increased by 20% because of that. Publish the final approved project list with the scores each proposal has generated. Put it on every wall at the company. I'm not saying for every project at the company, follow the Pareto principle. Top 20 projects that are responsible for 80% of resources. These are some of the ways. The idea behind that is that not only you generate quality proposals, the number of proposal increases, and hence you can pick better ones. It's one thing when you have to pick from 10 projects, and it's a completely different thing when you have to pick from 100 projects. The choices, the options available to you with 100 would be way better than if you just started with 10. Off the top of my head, that's what I would advise.
Our discussion today is about implementing project portfolio management and linking it to the strategy. So my final question to you is this here. How can project managers get more involved in this process?
For project managers, let me look at two scenarios. Scenario number one, you don't have project portfolio management in place and your company has no interest in developing project portfolio management methodology. Start asking questions like, why are we doing this project? What happens if we don't do this project? How does this project align with our strategy? What problem are we trying to solve? What opportunity are we trying to seize? What is the value of this project to our company? You have to include the answers to these questions in your project charter anyways, in one way or another. So it would be a very quick indication to you if you get very quick, straightforward, and very clear answers to these questions, then maybe this project is good for your company. If you hear stuff like, well, it will improve customer satisfaction and improve the image of the company or something along those lines, then probably there's a good sign that this is not a really high-value project for your organization. The second scenario is when you have project portfolio management in place, it is well developed. When you get a project verified that indeed, whatever score it was granted by the steering committee, it indeed is eligible for that score, using your common sense, using your knowledge, especially from the point of view of technical feasibility risks, because senior level people might oversee them, but you as a project manager might see some issues. And then just do your job as a project manager and provide your PMO or your executives, depending on how that model works, with reliable, trustworthy information. Again, don't forget to put on a CEO hat once in a while and try to understand the information that I'm sending up. Is it going to be helpful from the strategic point of view? Because sometimes project managers are trained to kind of look at on budget, over budget, on time, late, whereas you might be seeing some risks that do not have an impact on the project itself, but they have an impact on the strategy behind that project. So share that information as well. It will take time to learn how to do that, but that's a very important thing. So that's off the top of my head. These are the things that project managers can do.
Excellent. Once again, the book is called Project Portfolio Management in Theory and Practice. 30 case studies from around the world, best practices and advances in program management. It is written by Jamal Mustafaev and published by Auerbach Publications. And of course, you can get it in any fine online or offline bookstore. And the book weighs 1.1 pounds, which is half a kilo. Jamal, thank you so much for your time again today.
Thank you, Cornelius. Thank you very much.
And that was our project portfolio management discussion with Jamal Mustafaev. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. And when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. If at first you don't succeed, remove all evidence that you've ever tried. Until next time.